Hello and welcome back to my channel. Now what I have here next to me is this big pile. This is going to be a gargantuan video. I do apologize because what I have here is my physical TBR. Now as I mentioned in previous videos, I'm currently living in Kuwait and I'm going to be here for another 5 or 6 months. Now what that means is I'm not going to get through all these books in that time. So I need to make some decisions about which ones to keep, which ones to donate, and maybe which ones to let go of, at least for now. What I thought I could do in this vein is give you an overview of what this physical TBR looks like, go through these books step by step, talk about where I bought them, why I bought them. I firmly believe that the stories that we have in our own lives connect to the books that we're reading. So I might talk about where I was when I bought this book, why I think it might be an interesting read, and things like that. And that can kind of serve for now as a bookshelf tour, because this is everything I have apart from the few books that I've already finished, and a Dungeon Crawler Carl copy, which I'm not willing to get rid of. So let's go through these books together. Please let me know if you have read any of these books or you've heard that they're of quality. Let me know. If you found any of these disappointing, also please let me know so I know which ones to spend time on over the next several months. If you think any of them might be worth a video on their own as well, please let me know about that. So without further ado, let's get into my semi-TBR, semi-bookshelf tour and see how many of these we can walk through in the next half hour or so. So the first book I have here is actually one I definitely want to read, and that is Kings of Paradise by Richard Nell, which is the first book in the Ash and Sand. I believe it's a trilogy. Now, I really want to read this because, first of all, I've heard it's excellent, but second of all, it's a self-published book, and I have historically not been a huge fan of self-pub and indie pub books, and that was a flaw of mine. For years, I was just, I read a few of them, and I didn't enjoy them very much, and I won't name names, but they just didn't stick with me. And it wasn't until I picked up a couple of self-pub books. One of them was Blackstone Heart by Michael Fletcher, another one was Rob J. Hayes' Word Loyalties Lie, and then ultimately Dungeon Crawler Carl, and then The Wandering Inn after that I realised, and it sounds so silly when you say it out loud, books don't need to go through a publisher in order to be good. And I've been trying to read as many self-pub books as I can, and when I get my hands on a physical copy of one, I'm definitely keeping that. Apparently that one is amazing. I'm really looking forward to it. Another self-pub series I really want to get to is Philip Chase's Way of Adan series. I've heard that's a really lovely, kind of slightly darker take on a traditional fantasy trilogy. That's really something I want to get to as well, but I do have a physical copy of that, but it's back in Scotland. So that's not with me right now, so that's not on the cards, but I will get to that one soon. This next one, I'm not sure if I'm going to get to in time. It's Half the World by Joe Abercrombie. I have read all of the First Law trilogy. I'm immensely looking forward to The Devils, and I read Half a King. I read it about 3 years ago though, and I never quite picked up this sequel. And it looks like I could get through it in a couple of days, to be honest. It's not very long, and I enjoyed the first book, but I'm wondering if time has sort of slunk by to the extent that I need to go back and read the first book. I've actually had this for a bit longer because I picked this up in Japan, which was a few years ago now. So yeah, let me know if you think it's worth continuing with the series or not, because I will if enough people say it's worth it. So moving on from there, where shall I go next? Let's choose some chunky boys. I've got 2 chunky boys at the bottom here that are worth talking about, even though I don't think they're very related to each other as well. So here we have Peter Hamilton's, can't read that, The Reality Dysfunction. I know nothing about Peter Hamilton except that he's quite a respected sci-fi author. I saw this in a bookshop in Kuwait, and when I see something that's interesting, again, I do tend to buy it if it's cheap. But I don't know if I'm going to get to this in time. If you've read Peter Hamilton, let me know, and let me know if I should be bumping this one up the list. And similarly, and this is one I do really, really want to read, is Perdido Street Station by China Mavel. Mavel? Never read anything of him, and I've just heard he writes these exquisite sort of slightly surreal, slightly mad stories that really challenge the intellect. I didn't want to scroll through it. I don't want to look through it in case I see something that's a spoiler, because I'm really looking forward to this one. I just need to find the time to read it. This edition is about 900 pages, which is not actually that long when you're used to sci-fi and fantasy. So there's another China Mavel buried in here somewhere. I'll get to that when it comes. Similarly, Swan Song by Robert McCammon, yeah. I am loath to get rid of this one because I've heard that he's very good for Stephen King fans, and I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I think I've read about 60 Stephen King books at this point over the last 10 years. I'm also loath to give this one up because I bought it off Amazon and it cost me a pretty penny, which you wouldn't expect for a novel that kind of looks like this, but I don't know if he's still being published from Robert McCammon, so I think this is one that I need to hold on to and get to, because I've heard that if you love The Stand, this is the book to buy. So it's here, it's in my hand. Again, I just haven't had time to get to it yet, and I really hope I will. Let's go for another big one. Priory of the Orange Tree. I'll be honest, I bought this one because I like the cover. I have had friends who've read this and they've told me that it's a almost, is it a bit reductionist to say a feminist take on Lord of the Rings? I think that sounds a bit too trite and simplistic, doesn't it? But a Lord of the Rings kind of more traditional type fantasy that is really worthwhile. And I know that there's a sequel, or a prequel, I believe, that's come out, and more books set in this world. Again, it's just about the size. But you know, I don't know why I'm saying that, because I'm reading Wind and Truth right now, so I can't really use it as an excuse too much. So let me know, Priory of the Orange Tree, is it worthwhile? If it is, I will bump it up. And again, I have one of my friends who say that it is really good. Let's go to the back. Oh, this one won't take very long. Again, thought it was interesting. I bought this on my birthday, a present from me to me. It is a copy of Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. I mentioned in a previous video, I read Herodotus about, I'm so old, 5 years ago now. And I loved it. And I wasn't expecting to love it, but it really just put a smile on my face. They 10, 20 pages every night, sort of talking with this figure from the past who didn't actually sound that old. You know, it didn't sound, maybe it was the translation by Tom Holland that really did it for me, but it sounded like I was talking with someone as I was reading this book. So I really want to read some more ancient history. I also enjoy this copy in particular because it's annotated by some stranger in a used bookstore, and I love when I find a used annotated book. So I'm really keen to keep this. But again, time will tell. I'm just noticing there's some pencil stenciling in on this cover, so I don't know if you can see that there. Someone has kind of dug into it with their pen. I love used copies like that. I'd give me one of these over like a £200 first edition anytime. Moving on very quickly, let's go to these two books. Now, there's nothing very similar about Memoirs of a Geisha and A Confederacy of Dunces, except maybe their size. They're quite comparable in size, but they're both books I've had for a long time. Memoirs of a Geisha, I've heard as a classic. My sister loves it. Possibly something to get into there. Confederacy of Dunces, I've read the first 50 pages and it just didn't hit me the right way. And again, I don't know if that's just because I was at a certain point in my life that I wasn't quite interested in reading what was it felt quite almost slapstick. The humour didn't land with me, but I am keen to give it another go. And again, it's not that long, 400 pages, get through that in a week. But even, I don't know, even the cover's putting me off. Am I just being a bit biased unnecessarily? I don't know, perhaps. I will get to this if I can. Now let's move on to one of my new favourite authors, Isabel by Guy Gavriel Kay. Now, I have a problem. I have many problems, but the problem I have concerning Guy Gavriel Kay is I've only read one of his books, which is A Song for Arbonne, and I read that last year, and oh, I adored that book. I didn't know what I was in for, but I read it over the course of 4 or 5 nights. Enjoyed it immensely. Thematic, taking on so much in such a short, space of about 600 pages, building this whole world and kind of exploring it properly. So I found Isabel, and I bought it, but I understand it's book 4 in a series, or it's kind of like a sequel to a trilogy, the Fjordavar Tapestry. And I guess my question, if anyone knows, is it okay to read Isabel as a standalone and then go back to the Fjordavar Tapestry? Because I would love to read some more Guy Gavriel Kay this year, and this is the only physical book I have available to me. So if it is, I will, because I got Sailing to Sarantium, or I think that's the one. I have one of his books back in Scotland, but I don't have it right now. If this is worth reading, again, I will bump it up the TBR, but for the sake of time, let's move on a bit more quickly. Yes, let's go through these. I think I mentioned previously, pardon me, I used to live in Japan. I have a stack of manga here, which I won't go through, that is written in Japanese, that I used to use for language practice. It's just something that's fallen by the wayside as life has gotten in the way, but it's something I'm really keen to pick up again. The language, I picked these ones because the language isn't too difficult, and it is feasible to get through for me, even though sometimes it feels a little bit like homework when it gets a bit challenging, but I don't want to get rid of these because I really want to get back to my Japanese studying. When I lived in Japan, I would call myself maybe slightly conversational, certainly functional. I mean, I could go into a bank and get anything sorted. I could, organize myself and make myself understood, but if I had to sit down for a coffee date with a friend, I really struggled there. So there was room for improvement when I left. And I just don't want to give up that language acquisition, and I can feel it atrophying day by day. So I really want to get back to that and make sure that I can start building that up again over the coming years. Moving on, we have an Ian McEwan, which I know nothing about. Again, it was just cheap. I've only read by Ian McEwan, what's the famous one? Atonement. I read Atonement a few years ago and I enjoyed it. And I would like to read some more Ian McEwan. So here we go. Similarly, Joseph Heller, Something Happened. I think someone has dropped this in the bath at some point. I have read Catch-22. I've read his final book, Portrait of the Artist as an Old Man, which I quite enjoyed. And what was the one? God Knows, I think. The kind of parody of King David. And I've enjoyed them all. I have Something Happened here. I've heard it's great. Haven't opened it, but I want to. You can feel my body energy. I want to open it right now and read it. But I feel that for so many of these, which is why I'm making this video. So if Something Happened is worth it, let me know. Moving on very quickly to, what's this big one at the bottom? Let's see. Oh yeah, I'm definitely going to read this. Pillars of the Earth. I shouldn't have bought this. It's way too heavy. It's an absolute brick. Everyone seems to be reviewing it on BookTube right now, which is why I bought it actually in the first place. I haven't heard a negative thing about it. I've heard it's this magnificent historical novel, sweeping, takes place over a number of years, but it's about building a church. And I don't understand quite how that has fascinated so many people, but I'm keen to find out. This one is not going anywhere. This one is definitely staying with me, but I will bump it up if enough people tell me to. Sleeping Beauties by Stephen King. I'm a big Stephen King fan. I've read about 50 or 60 of his novels, and we're now kind of, I was going to say we're into the dregs, but I don't know if that's true because I haven't read them. But certainly Stephen King's less popular novels are kind of what remain, and you'll see a few of these in the pile. My cousin loves Sleeping Beauties, but I've heard enough of a mixed reception about it that maybe I'm not quite willing to commit. I'm a fan of late Stephen King as well. His last 10 or 20 years of output, I thought 11/22/63 was magnificent, but at the same time I thought Under the Dome was hugely underwhelming. Don't know where this falls. Maybe the audiobook would be a better way to go here. That's a bit less of a time sink if I can do it while doing the dishes or going jogging and things like that. Moving on, we have, I have a few poetry books. This is John Milton's complete works that I have carried around with me for years, swearing that one year I'm going to crack open this spine, I'm going to consume the complete works of John Milton, and like a fake academic, I never have. I got this book in university about 10, 12 years ago. Pretty damning cover, pun intended. I feel like if I let this book go, I'm letting go my pretensions at academia. And so maybe there's more of a sentimental thing here, an emotional beat there. But I hold on to this book, and one day I swear I will read the complete works of John Milton. Maybe it's just having two children, aged 4 and 2. That just makes it a bit of a challenge, but more of a cognitive strain than I can handle right now. Similarly, I see this one down here, similar thing, the complete works of W.B. Yeats. When I studied Yeats in university, when I spent a year in the USA, I actually studied British literature. It was a bit of a cognitively confusing time in my life, I guess. I really liked Yeats. And this is a very accessible kind of book that doesn't take a whole lot of effort. I'm actually noticing that I have one of my old assessments, the quizzes the professor used to give us back in here, so that's got lots of sentimental value. I'm actually delighted to have found those. Wonder how many I got right. Oh, okay, never mind. This is something I really want to read. And partly for that nostalgia as well, when I moved to the States for a year, which is where I met my wife, it was a really formative time of my life. And that actually, I think, goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that certain books you don't want to get rid of because of the sentimental value. Where you were when you picked them up, where you were when you were reading them. And there's a few books here that are kind of like that. I'm repeating myself. I'm going to move on very quickly. Red Rising, I know nothing about it, except that everyone loves it. I've heard the first book isn't quite as good as the others. I haven't really dug into this yet, I guess because I'm a bit wary about starting another series. I've got about 6 or 7 long series on the go right now. And I'm wondering if another one is slightly too many. But again, I don't want to give it up because I've heard that Red Rising is a very rewarding series. Very quickly, I know nothing about this book called The Gender Secret, other than someone gave it to me because they had finished reading it and thought I might like to read it. It looks like a YA novel. I know nothing about it. Second book in the Gender Game series, so I think this is one I'm probably going to jettison. If I don't have book 1, what's the point in having book 2, huh? I have a copy of George R.R. Martin's, I believe these are his own, or the pile is beginning to fall apart. Dream Songs Volume 2, a bunch of George R.R. Martin's shorter fiction. Don't think I need to have Volume 1, I just quite like the look of this. I really enjoy reading short fiction whenever I can. I like to take a book of short stories and read one a night over a few weeks, something like that. And this looks like a lovely, older, hardback copy, but the time has never felt right. But hey, more George R.R. Martin is always welcome in a world where sometimes it feels like there's not enough George R.R. Martin, if you know what I mean. Moving on, we have Terry Pratchett. I've read about a dozen Terry Pratchett Discworld novels. Moving Pictures I haven't read. Again, I've had this one for a wee while. It's just never, I always feel like I want to pick up one of the series I'm already kind of dug into, whether that's Death or I love The Witches. The Witches are my favorite, or the Sam Vimes stuff. So starting a kind of standalone Terry Pratchett has never quite felt right. But I've heard it's one of his better ones, to be honest, so maybe it's time. Lies of Locke Lamora, similarly, haven't started it because it's another series that partially I don't want to dig into another series, although I do, and partially because it's unfinished. And I've heard it's not as big a slap in the face, this one, compared to King Killer or Song of Ice and Fire, that this one is unfinished because they all function relatively as standalones. I've had this book for years. You can see the damage it's in as I've carried it from place to place. I think I read the first 50 pages of it, but it just didn't feel like the right time. I really, really want to get into this, what might just be a trilogy, and even if it's not, that's fine, because I've heard that for some people it's their favourite book of all time. And a lot of booktubers I really respect say it's one of their favourite books of all time, so maybe, and it's quite small and compact, I could take this one with me, look, my hand can wrap around it. Yes, I think I'm hitting these books too much right into the microphone. I'm sorry if that's the case. When I get better at editing, I'll know how to get rid of that. I'm going to chew through these next, oh, it's all becoming a bit unhinged. These 3 books, which were just given to me by a colleague who finished books and knows I love books and has given these to me. The Day After Tomorrow. Wait, is that the? Oh, based on, not based on the movie. The thing the movie is based on, I guess. I didn't even realize I had this, and I'm probably going to read The Day After Tomorrow. And I quite like this edition as well. It's kind of old-fashioned, old-timey. This thriller called The Sinner, I know nothing about. If you've read any Tess Gerritsen, please let me know. And this book, which doesn't quite look like my thing, but someone gave it to me, probably because they're trying to get rid of their own books. It's called The Golden... Can't even read that. What is that? Lily? A Bloodlines novel. I probably won't be reading this. I'll probably give it to someone who I think could probably give it a better home. But maybe I'm judging a book by its cover. So we have that. I think we're about halfway done. I swear that one day I'm going to open Percy Shelley's complete works and read through it. Probably. After I get to John Milton. Don't judge me. Suetonius, the 12 Caesars. I think I already mentioned that I really liked reading Herodotus a few years ago. And this is a very similar series. A similar thing where I've got this ancient voice from the past that I'd really love to, I think the word commune with, I'm kind of overusing that, am I? But another book that I'd really love to get stuck into and broaden my reading horizons. I've had this on the shelf. I'm always worried that it's just going to languish there because I want to look pretentious, but that's not true. I do want to get into more of this. I think it's just a thing that, you know, when you're sitting looking at this and then you're looking at the next, I don't know, Stephen Erickson novel, Lead the Second for me is always going to feel a bit more tempting. But I say always, maybe not, if I just, you know, get into it a bit more. This pile is very unhinged. This one is Disintegrating. Another Tess Gerritsen novel from my colleague slash friend. I really appreciate her giving them to me. And these do look quite enjoyable, to be honest, so maybe I will give this one a go, as long as it's not book 2 of a series. Now, oh, let's go down here now. Oh, no. Excuse me for a second. The pile is becoming unhinged. Now, Wheel of Time. I have read the first 10 books of the Wheel of Time. I think I stopped on book 11. I got through to book 11 by sheer force of will because it wasn't really for me. I think I read them in the wrong order. I read Malazan, I read Joe Abercrombie, and then I tried Wheel of Time. And that's not to say that Wheel of Time is of poor quality. I know that opinions vary there. But I think I should have read The Wheel of Time first. So I got to book 11 and I kind of was reading it while I was audiobooking it while jogging, which is how I got through so many books. I was training for a half marathon a few years ago. And I have books, I think this is 12 and 13 here. I don't have book 11, but I have it on my Kindle. Maybe it's time to read The Wheel of Time, but I mean, I finished book 10 about 4 years ago now, and I don't know if I should be going back to the beginning. That sounds very daunting. Should I just find a summary online? And is it worth wrapping up The Wheel of Time? I don't know. I have books 12, 13 here. These are not going in a suitcase, unfortunately. I think these are going to go to a new home because I can't really afford to take 2 or 3 kilograms of a series I'm on the fence about. I think my marriage will last if I do that, but barely. Now, my wife is long-suffering. I love her very much. Similarly, let's go back to Stephen King. I've got 2 more Stephen Kings here that I do want to read. Fairy Tale and Talisman. I've heard Talisman is great. I've heard Fairy Tale is middling for Stephen King, but it's a nice edition. It's a nice first edition hardback. Not that first edition means anything when it came out about 2 years ago, but it's a nice copy. And it's something that I would like to read to see if it's worth keeping on a shelf in the future. The Talisman I know I'm going to like. I think it's the last kind of mainline connected Dark Tower book that I've got to. So that's something else I want to get to. Infinite Jest. I don't know if it's pretentious to have it when I haven't read it. I've never talked about it. I've just kept it on a shelf. For some people, it's one of their favorite books of all time, apparently. For some people, it is the symbol of being a bit of a hack reader who likes to talk about their reading more than read. However, I am talking about the books I want to read, so maybe that does apply to me. I know nothing about David Foster Wallace. All I know is that this book is incredibly difficult. And sometimes the most difficult books are some of the best books of all time. I really did enjoy Ulysses when I read that a few years ago, for example. Stephen Erickson, some people call him quite difficult, but Malazan is one of my favorite series of all time. Maybe it's worth giving this one a go. I don't know. If you've read Infinite Jest, does it deserve its reputation, both its positive and its negative reputation? Please let me know, because Again, maybe a Kindle version would be more suited to me here, but there's something quite nice about chewing through a sizable novel, and I'd rather read the paperback if possible. David Foster Wallace, I know had a tragic end, but I don't really know anything else about him as well. It's just kind of this mystery box I've had on my shelf. Ian M. Banks. Now, I have 2 Ian M. Bankses. Right, this pile has not stood the test of time. Yes, here it is. Ha-ha! Right, I've got book 10 of the Culture series, The Hydrogen Sonata. I've read 9 Culture novels. I have a love and hate relationship with the Culture. I think his best books, Use of Weapons, for example, Accession, are some of the best sci-fi ever written. And I was lucky enough to see Ian Banks speak at my university when I was a student. I think it was about 2010, 2011. It was the year before he was diagnosed with his terminal cancer. But I often find with the Culture, the books that aren't quite as good, I really suffer through. But I have this last one to go. And I've heard it's about the middle of the pack, The Hydrogen Sonata. And I think I'm also quite wary to read it, because then there's no more Culture novels. And again, the ones that are good are some of the best books I've ever read. So there's that. Talking about personal connection to Ian M. Banks, I've had this that I picked up from a charity shop in Scotland a few years ago and opened it up about a month ago to realise that it's actually a signed copy. It says, "To Eddie, all the best, Ian M. Banks." Now, I know the man was a prolific signer, but it's still quite nice to have a copy of it. And I guess I'm quite wary to read it because I don't want to damage the book in any way when it's already a bit tatty. But this is something I do want to keep in the future, because Ian M. Banks is one of the preeminent modern-ish sci-fi writers. And yeah, also I love how janky the cover is. Look at that. What a fantastically classic cover. So I don't know what to do with it. And I'm going to put it back here because it's a bit more special. Fearsome Engine, that book is called. I've heard it's written in the kind of almost not train spotting. It's like train spotting in the sense that it uses a lot of slang. Or it's like Clockwork Orange in that sense, that it's quite hard to get used to the prose if it's not something you're used to reading. But I will read that one at some point. That one is not going anywhere. Again, I will staple that one to my chest if need be. Chuck Palahniuk, Chuck, Fight Club I loved. But as I was reading Chuck Palahniuk, I was realizing that the books of his that I loved, I was reading because they were famous. And then as I dug more and more into his backlog, I was finding a lot of scrap. And so I kind of stopped reading Chuck Palahniuk. Now what I'm noticing here, I don't know if that's the novel itself or if that's my copy. No, it is. No, it's not. It's the novel itself is censored, so never mind. Sometimes in Kuwait you come across novels that are censored because the ministry asks you to scribble stuff out. So I was wondering if that's what was happening there. Don't get me started. But yeah, maybe I should give Chuck one more go. The books that were impressed, it's like Ian M. Banks, the books that impressed me really impressed me. So maybe it's time to do that one again. The Leaving, again, a gift from a friend who'd finished it and told me it was pretty good, but I don't know anything about it. I think it's a bit more of is it ergodic? Those texts are called, the ones that kind of play with the space on the page. So that's maybe something to look into. But again, it's not something I know kind of sufficiently enough about this book. I've just heard that it's popular and opinions differ. So let me know if you've read that and what you think. Let's get through some of these a bit more quickly. Rent and Mystery of Fine Balance. Again, I've had this one for years. I know nothing about it except that it's very good. I believe it's set in India. Yeah, set in the 1970s, mid-1970s in India. I've heard it's a fine novel. Fine in the positive sense, not in the adequate sense. Just never had time to crack the spine. Similarly, Metro 2033. I love the video game, so I picked up the book. I think a lot of people have done that. I also really enjoy, I've never read it, but what Dmitry Glukovsky has done with his world, that he's opened it up and lots of people can publish in this world of Metro 2033. And my understanding is that it's all canon. So he sort of just exploded this notion of canon open by saying anyone can write in this story if I invite you to, or I don't know if he even has to approve of the people who write in his world, or if he just lets anyone kind of explore it. And just for that alone, I kind of want to read his book. I think that's a really interesting idea, but I haven't got to it yet. Ball Lightning by Cixin Liu. Three Body Problem. When I get around to making a top 10 series, I would put Three Body Problem in my top 10 for sure, probably about the 5 or 6 mark. When I finished The Dark Forest about 2.5 years ago, I went for a long walk in a slightly dodgy neighborhood. In retrospect, I could not get the idea of The Dark Forest out of my head. And it kind of makes me sad that The Dark Forest has kind of become more of a popular concept these days. And I'm not going to explain what it means if you haven't read this book, because it's much better to read The Dark Forest and discover what The Dark Forest is through that way than finding it through cultural osmosis, through a YouTube video or something like that. But I would really recommend The Three Body Problem. Ball Lightning, I believe, is loosely connected to The Three Body Problem. It has a similar character, a recurring character in it. That's all I know. Again, it's very short. If you look at the actual text on the page, it's not going to take very long to read. This is something I definitely want to get to. James S.A. Corey's The Expanse series, I've read books 1 and 2. I quite enjoyed them. I don't think it's my top 10 by any stretch, but they were good, solid fantasy stories, not fantasy, sci-fi, with a sprinkle of zombies thrown in. My question to you, if you've read this series to completion, is it worth continuing if I lightly enjoyed The Expanse series, or is it maybe worth packing it in and moving on to other stuff? As I'm looking at this, I'm realizing how limited my, how could you call it, personal shelf life is, and I'm probably not going to get to all these books. So if it is worth picking up and continuing, let me do that, please. Ian McEwan, another one, Saturday. I don't know anything about it, but I have it. What's the other one, Saturday too? What was the other one? Well, it's gone now. Do I have the same book twice? I'll have to rewind back and find out. I enjoyed Atonement. Again, maybe worth picking up. Similarly, I've got another Chuck Palahniuk that I just saw. Where'd he go? Where'd you go, man? There he is. Survivor. Again, it was cheap. I bought it for a couple of pounds, and I haven't cracked the spine. Is it worth reading, Survivor? Is it one of the kind of stodgier Chuck novels? I should stop calling him Chuck, it's a bit disrespectful. Let me know, because I don't know what to do with this book that I have. Now on to one of my favorite authors of all time, Dan Simmons. I adore the Hyperion Cantos. I adore The Terror. Song of Kali, I think, is wonderful. The Abominable, I know that the reactions to that are a bit controversial, depending on who you ask. I personally really enjoyed The Abominable. And I have two Dan Simmons novels here that are apparently very high quality. I know Summer of Night is very celebrated, and Drood is one of those more mixed bags of novels, but he is one of my favorite authors. He is extremely versatile. He prioritizes theme in a way that I find deeply impressive. And I also like his concepts. I think Drood, for example, is about the story, a fictional hypothesis of what happened to Charles Dickens in his final couple of weeks, I believe, of life. And it kind of ties into his final novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, which was left unfinished. And that's all I know about it. I believe it's a ghost story, which would be very Charles Dickens, wouldn't it? And then Summer of Night, again, one of these coming-of-age novels, kind of like something Stephen King would write. And it's a tragedy that I've not gotten to this yet. And this is another one that's definitely not going anywhere. Speaking of Charles Dickens, I have the Pickwick Papers. I read this. Again, it's another used copy with lots of annotations, which I love. I've read this. I very much enjoyed it. I read it when I was 16 or something. And it's an annotated copy. Maybe I'll get back to it. Reading the complete Charles Dickens, the complete set of novels, is something I'd really like to do going forward, and whenever I have the time. Where are we going next? Let's just grab a chunk of books and see what they are. I swear that I will read this copy of medieval poetry one day. It might not be this day, but I'm not going to give it up, along with John Milton and the rest. Atlas 6, I don't know anything about. I believe this is a very, recently published novel. That's very good, actually. But again, it was given to me by a friend. I don't know anything about it. It is the first book in a series by the looks of things. Oh, and someone left their bookmark in here too, which I always love. You are cool. We'll see. It doesn't look like it would take too long to get through. I think I've heard, I might look up some reviews of this online. If you've read it, please let me know. Might be worth bumping that one up the TBR. As well as Julio Cortázar's Hopscotch, which is another kind of experimental novel. I really do love experimental novels. Maybe I'll make a video about my top 5 sort of experimental novels that play with text on the page. Maybe ones that disappointed me a bit, because they very much are a mixed bag. You've got these brilliant writers like B.S. Johnson, who I love. House of Leaves I have a lot of love for as well, but I understand the criticisms. And then you have some texts that kind of experiment with the page that I think are a bit gimmicky. Maybe it's worth making a video about that, but I've heard that Julio Cortázar is one of the, this author is one of the preeminent examples of that done well. And I'm really keen to take this somewhere and give it the justice it deserves. I've not heard a bad thing about this novel, to be honest. It's really worth maybe bumping that one up too, as I've said about 9 times, and this is the problem. I have a bit of an anxiety issue. And my mother's given me this book called Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before? Thanks, Mum. I will read this, and I will take this because you gave it to me, because I'm a sweet son, and I love you as well, my mother. So, yeah, we'll see how this is. But if someone buys me something as a gift, of course I'm going to read it. It might not be the next book I read, but of course I will give it a go. I just told my mother I loved her on a video. Well, she will enjoy that if she ever sees this. 2 more books that have been given to me. One's called The Dream Dealer by Marietta Phillips, and one is called Shadow and Bone, and it's got the ugliest as seen on Netflix sticker. I don't know anything about either of these books. Maybe I'll give those ones a go as well. We're coming into the home stretch here, actually. It was quite exciting. I swear I will read this book of medieval English poetry at some point, and I'll stop carrying it around the world, but it is not this day. I have, looks to be about 15 books left. Can you hear the fatigue in my voice? If you're still holding on, well done. John Steinbeck. I read The Grapes of Wrath in China. I was traveling through China for a month with my wife, and it was a really nice time. I really enjoyed it. I don't know why I chose to read one of the quintessential American novels as I was traveling through China on the train, but I did, and I just thought it was such a beautifully written novel. And I know that some people view it as kind of his kind of cliche work to read, but I really struck a chord in me as I was reading it. I just thought the prose page to page was gorgeous. I don't know what Cannery Row's like. I've heard East of Eden is a really lovely book. I don't know if it's lovely, but it's a marvellous book. This may be a better word for it. So if this is worth, I mean, it's only 100 pages. I could get through that in an afternoon. Let me know if this is something that I should be prioritizing, please. Dune Messiah. I read Dune about 4 years ago, and I've always been a bit scared to pick this up, although I've heard it's not bad. But since I read Dune such a long time ago, it feels as though I've missed the boat on the sequel. What I've heard about Dune Messiah is it's more of an epilogue than an actual sequel. And I wasn't the hugest fan of Dune, I'll be honest. That's more to do with the writing style than it was to do with the plot. I thought the narrative was excellent. But I wonder if it's going to be maybe the same thing where I'll kind of get a bit bored with the prose of Frank Herbert. Although I know that he's many people's absolutely beloved author, I don't think that book was quite for me. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as other people do. Maybe I should have read him before I read some of the later stuff. So I've kept that around. I might get to it, but if I'm honest, I'm not that looking forward to it. Another book I really want to get to, but haven't quite worked out how to. Neil Stephenson. And I have two of his books here. Anathem, I think I said this in the previous video, didn't I? And Cryptonomicon. Neil Stephenson is one of my favourite authors who I've never read, I think would be a way of putting it. I've heard he's brilliant. I've heard, again, versatile, startlingly good ideas, really intriguingly laid out on the page. It's just, again, never felt like the right time. And I'm sorry for repeating that ad nauseum. I've just heard they're excellent, but when I look at my shelf and I decide what to read next, there always seems to be something else that I want to read first, which is a shame because I'm judging Neil Stephenson when I've never read him and I've heard he's amazing. And again, I think he probably would be one of my favourite authors if I ever cracked the spine on one of these. So definitely one of these two will be read in the next few months. Maybe I'll make that my New Year's commitment. I think I've already said that this is one I really want to get to, Anathem, which is his, well, from what I understand, his richest but maybe most inaccessible book, which, you know, I started Cormac McCarthy by reading Blood Meridian, so I'm kind of used to that. Gaurav Mahinti, Sons of Darkness. I got 200 pages into this installed because I didn't want to take it on my summer vacation. I liked it. I wouldn't say I was loving it. The writing didn't quite gel with me, but maybe it's time to give it another go. I love having this beautiful book, and I really was intrigued by the characters and the plot, but every time I put it down, I didn't really feel inclined to pick it back up. And again, I don't know if that's just me not being in the right headspace for it, so it's something I've been reluctant to let it go, especially because I know the sequel's out, and it's a new author in the space, Gaurav Mahinti, from what I understand. So maybe give this one another go. I think if I try it again and I stall again, though, it probably will be the final time I do give Mahinti's work a go. Sons of Darkness, someone told me to buy. The piles are getting a bit unruly. Sons of Darkness by, no, it's not Sons of Darkness, Into the Darkness by Harry Turtledove. Again, I found it for £1 back in the UK. People have told me it's great. I've never read it. I've never read anything by Turtledove. The cover is fabulous. Proper old-fashioned, and the back cover reads like a heavy metal novel. The death of the Duke leads to bloody war as the King of Algarve moves swiftly to reclaim the duchy that was lost during a previous conflict. It sounds, apologies to Turtledove and Turtledove fans, it sounds brilliantly hokey. Again, like a heavy metal music video. And I'm there for that. You know, if someone tells me to read this, I probably will. And I've heard lots of people endorse this series that I know nothing about. I'm going to put these on the floor now so another catastrophe doesn't happen. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 books to go. I'm going to say the next one I want to read is Fool's Fate because I'm reading The Golden Fool. I'm going to read this. The reason that I have this is because this is the last in the 20-man trilogy. I'll then probably take a few months before I pick up the Rainwild Chronicles, which I've heard is a slight downturn from the quality that we come to expect from Robin Hobb. So I'm really waiting to treasure this one. Maybe next time I go on a holiday, I'll take it with me. I'm halfway through The Golden Fool. I expect that to be wrapped up in the next maybe week or so. And then it's on to this final one in that middle trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings. I'm very much looking forward to this. Similarly, two other series that I'm really looking forward to digging into at some point. We have Malice by John Gwynne and The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. Now, Two authors I haven't read a page of that I've heard are really good. I know that John Gwynne has a couple, maybe 3 different series out. I think he's most recently wrapped up a series. Has a dragon on the front, doesn't it? I sound very inept as a booktuber. But I've heard John Gwynne is just great. Writes really, really good books. And I've never gotten to him. So why not? Maybe I'll give him a go this year. Similarly, The Grace of Kings, I have heard that Ken Liu is one of the best authors in the space, and he does not get the renown he deserves. I'm really keen to give him a go. I think he... Am I speaking out of turn? Did he translate some of the 3 body novels? Forgive me if that's wrong. I could be making that up there. Maybe I'm just getting the name Liu crisscrossed. But I've heard this this quartet, this tetralogy of books is fantastic. Sweeping, whole world ramifications, but with really close eye on some really spectacular characters, kind of innovative take, based on, I believe, Chinese history, though I could be speaking out of turn at this point. This is another book that is going to be read. And if I have to jettison this book, I will buy it on Kindle, which seems like a waste of money, but if I can't bring it with me, that's what I will do, because he is high up on the list. Someone I really want to get to this year, in fact, Ken Liu. Now, another book. I've read a few Michael Morpurgo's, given to me by a friend who I think finished it and wanted to fob it off on someone else. Looks maybe like a young adult book, 250 pages of text this size. I know nothing about it. It's got a horse on the front. I'm going to give it a go. If a friend gives me a book because they think that I will enjoy it, I will read that. P.G. Wodehouse, someone I want to get into. I bought this years ago. I've just held on to it. I've never thrown it away because it's so slim. But I always have this idea that I'm going to work through the complete P.G. Wodehouse, Jeeves and Wooster stories. I've heard they're hilarious. One of my colleagues in a previous workplace swore by them, swore they were still hilarious to this day. And I'm a sucker for that kind of old-fashioned wry comedy that I believe is in this. Look how cheap this book is. I love it. You know, it looks like it was self-published. So that is something I'm going to get to soon. And by soon, I mean at some point. Don't hold me to that. But I've heard that Wodehouse is great and he is worth delving into. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books remaining. Let's get through them. Tim Weaver, a thriller here, Chasing the Dead. This is book 1 in a series that I believe has now gotten to about 13 or 14 books. Tim Weaver I used to follow as the editor of an Xbox magazine that I used to follow quite closely when I was a teenager. He quit that magazine to start a writing career that I believe has taken off quite nicely. And I read this when I was 16 and enjoyed it, and I'm curious to see if it holds up and whether it's worth continuing with that series or if it's something that is a bit, what's the word, golden in hindsight. But I remember really enjoying it. I remember it being a proper page-turner, Chasing the Dead. Raymond Chandler, again, I found it for £1. Never read any Raymond Chandler. I hear he's excellent. This is book 1, I believe, not book 1, but his first book. I mean, it's got a 1 on the front, so that should tell you something. I will get to this at some point. Again, whether it's this actual copy, I do not know. This is one that I intended to use during work. This is a book of flash fiction. It's just called Flash Fiction International. I believe it's published annually. And it is just a collection of stories about this long. And I used to really love flash fiction. I used to go into flash fiction websites. I dabbled in writing flash fiction. They were garbage, but that's okay. I enjoyed writing them. I want to get through this book because I want to rekindle my love of flash fiction, which was really strong at one point. And they're really easy to read. It's like sitting down and having a cup of tea. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't take very long. And if a story is really good, it can stay with you for years, despite being a page and a half long. There was another big book I read that was 100 short stories about the afterlife, and I'm totally blanking on the name. If I remember it, I'll put it in the description below. But that was the collection of short stories that really kind of showed me what that medium can do and how it can pack such a weighty punch in the space of sometimes about 50, 60 words. If you haven't read any flash fiction, I heartily recommend giving it a go, especially if your reading time like mine is quite limited. Another China Miéville novel, October. I believe this is a non-fiction account of the Russian Revolution. I think I bought this to read when I was traveling through Russia and didn't actually read it. I think I read something else instead, probably The Grapes of Wrath. I think once I have a better handle of who China Miéville as a writer through his fiction, this is something I want to get to. One of my goals maybe going forward is to read more modern history or kind of last 100 years history. So that's something I can get to there as well. I have 2 more books, and I'm going to talk about this one next, Skyward. I am halfway through Wind and Truth, and I think you can hear in my voice that I'm feeling a bit burnt out with it, and I am not going to be that person who talks about how bad Wind and Truth is, because the first thing is it's not a bad book. But I'm certainly finding it quite slow going. And I've got about 600 pages left, and I'm wondering if it's almost time to not give up on Brandon Sanderson, because I think he's an extremely talented author who is becoming a bit popular to diss, and I don't think he deserves that. I really think his stories are wonderful. But I'm wondering if I will get to Skyward, because maybe it's time to just give him a break for a year. So when I come back to him fresh, I'll have rekindled that love that I Still have, but is beginning to fade as I've gone through so much Brandon Sanderson in the past couple of years. I've really tried to go through his whole work. I've got a spreadsheet, I think I mentioned this, of about 80 books that he's published, or 80 texts. I'm on text about 55, and I think it's time to maybe put pause on that and come back. But guys, my final book on my TBR is Child of Ruin by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And I read Children of Children of Time was the first book in this series, and I really liked it. But it's a similar thing to, which book was it that I said this about as well? Shattered Sea Trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, where I read book one such a long time ago. I'm wondering if I need to go back and reread that book before I come to Children of Ruin. Although I've heard there's a bit of a time jump. I mean, the first book is all about time jumps, isn't it? But I'm wondering if it's necessary to go back and read that first book, if a summary would suit. But guys, we did it. Thank you for sticking around. That is my complete physical TBR. I do have a stack more books on Audible. I have a stack more books on my Kindle. And I have a few books pottering around that I have read but want to hold on to for various reasons of sentimental value. My pledge to myself is not to buy any more physical books until I can get through some of these and get out the country and find a different stash to start to add to. Maybe can start constructing my own bookshelves as well. As I've talked about previously, I want to really have the next place I move to, I want to have a proper bookshelf where I can take my favorites and put them on there. But for now, that is what I have. I would be delighted to hear from you. Which books do you think I should be prioritizing from that list? If you've read any of them and you like them or you dislike them, please let me know, because I will get to them if there is a clamor that you think that they are a priority. But in the meantime, thank you very much for coming through this video, and I will see you in the next one. So cheers. Bye.